Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have an absolutely monster 13-game Major League Baseball slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really does help the channel a lot. I really do appreciate it. Thank you guys for uh, watching the videos and stuff like that. Make sure to check out the Discord and the links in the description too, because we have some cool people in there. It's definitely worth taking a look there. We do have some weather concerns today. The Colorado game and at Chicago White Sox has a little bit of a risk. Pittsburgh, Atlanta has a little risk. Cleveland at Cincinnati has a little risk, and Cincinnati at St. Louis has a little risk. But all these games should play. I think that Chicago White Sox game is probably the riskiest game on the slate. With that said, let's go ahead and get into our pitching. Now, pitching is kind of crazy today. There really isn't a ton of great options. I mean, there's some good ones, but they're not great today. So that is a little bit of a concern, but it is still an interesting slate. We do have some good pitching, but it's just a little bit hectic. Um, our top ownership for pitchers is going to be Logan Gilbert, Bailey Ober, uh, uh, Charlie Morton, and then Frankie Montas and Slade Sassoni. So do keep that in mind. With that said, let's get into this here. So for the top overall pitcher is Gilbert for Seattle. Now, he did have a bad game against Minnesota earlier this season, but he does have absolutely fantastic metrics here. He's one of the best pitchers on the slate, and he does have a good K rate and an okay matchup here. He did have a bad game there, like I mentioned, but he's had 4 straight 20 fantasy point games, and he's got decent upside here at this one with a good strikeout potential. I do think that he's a little bit risky, but you could definitely stack this game at pitching because over is probably going to be your second best option on the slate with also a really good K rate here. His high ceiling, though, he does have a high ceiling and has a good game against Seattle the last time he played them with 18 fantasy points. Uh, last time they played, but I do think he's a viable option today. He has a high ceiling, but his floor is lower. He's had some really bad games lately too, so that is a little bit of a concern. That's kind of the how this slate looks. A lot of the pitchers are they have good upside, but they have risk involved here. Now, I do think Ober is a little bit safer than Gilbert since he's a little bit cheaper and he's got technically a little bit easier of a matchup, but both of them have nice potential today. The third guy that I like a lot is Charlie Morton. Now, Morton has been in this weird thing where he's in the last 10 starts, he's had 5 over 20 fantasy points and 5 under 5 fantasy points. If that trend continues, he's done it every other game. He should have a really good one today, or at least 20 plus today, and he's got a decent matchup for it against Pittsburgh. So I think he's a viable option. His K rate is also as good as Ober and Gilbert. So when it comes to strikeouts, which we really want and really important, and pitching, he's definitely up there along with Ober and Gilbert as top overall plays from that perspective. So I think he's a good play. His K rate is, the third best on the slate too. So I think that he has good upside here. This game's at home, which should help him a little bit too, even though he's been pretty much the same both home and the road. I do think he has a little bit of advantage today. So it looks like he's going to have a good opportunity for a solid game here. Some other guys to consider here will be Ronel Blanco for Houston against the Mets. The K rate here is really the limiter. He should be able to limit the earned runs, but the K rate has been inconsistent and has really limited his upside in some games. So I do think he has some viability here, but he's definitely a contrarian GPP play on the slate. Then we'll look at Logan Webb for San Francisco. Now, he's got an absolutely monstrous situation here against the Dodgers. However, the last time he played the Dodgers, he did well, though he's had 2 games against the Dodgers this season. One was good, one was bad, and so it could kind of go either way here. He's definitely an extreme GPP play, but he does have that potential to have a solid game, and he's priced a little higher than I'd like based on that. Then we got one other extreme option here for Thorpe for the Chicago White Sox. He's facing Colorado today, which Colorado is one of the worst teams on the slate. Now, if we look at him, he's only pitched 3 games so far, but he has managed a couple good games here. Now, his K rate is very low, and it's definitely super risky here, but he hasn't been terrible outside that Arizona game. And he's had 4 or 5 strikeouts in the 2 games against Detroit and Seattle, so he's definitely capable of a decent game, especially against one of the weakest teams in baseball. And this game being at the Chicago White Sox also helps because it's not in Colorado. So I do think he's got some potential here for a decent enough game, but he's definitely kind of an extreme GPP or a borderline Hail Mary play on the slate. Then we'll look at Montas for Cincinnati. Now, he has a favorable matchup with St. Louis, though I don't think he's a great play as he hasn't really had a ton of any. He's only had one or two really good games this season. He does have some upside in this matchup as this is a good situation for him, but he's dirt cheap here, so he's a Hail Mary play. But he is risky. He's very risky, and he's not somebody that I would use as a top tier option. His K rate is super low, and he's just kind of a he's a guy that you're just desperate to save money to get in there. Slade Sony is in a similar situation for Arizona. He's had a couple good games this season, but not too many. But the matchup here is good. Oakland won't be able to score too many runs here. The question is if he can get enough strikeouts to actually make it so that he can get to like 15 to 20 fantasy points. At this price point, he's definitely capable of that. He hasn't really given up a ton of earned runs with the exception of 3 or 4 different games. Most games he doesn't give up too many. But I do see Oakland potentially getting a couple of home runs here. But if he can get a few strikeouts, then he can definitely offset that. But he's a high risk, high reward Hail Mary play at this position. Let's look at our catchers here. Now, we have a very interesting slate here. Catchers, they look like they're going to be definitely capable of home runs, but looking at our top overall play is Travis d'Arnaud here for Atlanta. Now, obviously, if whoever starts for Atlanta is going to be in play, d'Arnaud has struggled some this season, but he's got a very favorable matchup here, and his matchup metrics are really solid. He also has good home run upside today, and he's probably one of the best value plays on the slate as well, just being at $3,900. Gives him a lot of potential. The way that Atlanta has been this season, some of their guys have actually come down in price a little bit, and he's definitely going to try to take advantage of that on this particular slate. The other guys that I like here, though, Logan Hope for the Angels. This matchup is somewhat interesting here. He's been pretty solid, though, throughout the season, and in certain situations, he has had really good upside. He's one of my favorite home run hitters at this position today, and he also has good multi-hit potential on this one, though he is a little bit more limited because the Angels probably won't score a ton of runs when it comes to that kind of stuff. He still has good upside on the slate. Yanir Diaz for Houston also looks fantastic today. He's been up and down throughout the season, but he's been really good lately, and he doesn't have to hit a home run to pay off here at this price point. He's a nice contrarian option off of d'Arnaud and Logan Hope. A couple other guys to consider, Shea Langerlays, Francisco Alvarez, and Bo Naylor. And then for an expensive play, David Fry would be my top overall play, but his home run metrics today are not nearly as good as some of the other guys. But William Contreras also falls into play as a high risk, high reward play on the slate. So I do think, as far as value play, Bo Naylor is probably my favorite super cheap option. But I do think Travis d'Arnaud is the best option overall. Looking at our first baseman here, we do have an interesting slate from this perspective as well. But this is an expensive position today. There's not a ton of cheap guys that look really solid at this position, but they definitely have some potential at least. So we'll start with Josh Naylor here at the top of Cleveland. Now, he has absolutely fantastic metrics here. He's been really inconsistent lately, but when he does draw the start, he has a lot of potential today. He's taken a couple games off, but he has some good potential. He's just a kind of a better best play most days. He's a little bit pricey for that, but he's very capable of a huge game, and so he's definitely worth a look in this situation. His home run metric today is pretty good. However, Matt Olson's looks absolutely meteoric on this slate. While he has struggled all year, he's really improved his hitting a couple weeks ago, but he has struggled since then again. The strikeouts have been too much, but I do think that he has a lot of utility in this matchup. His home run metric is actually higher than Ohtani's today, so that gives him a lot of upside on the slate. And he's actually underpriced for that upside today, so I do think he's got a lot of utility on the slate, though he is fairly expensive. Michael Busch is in play today for the Chicago Cubs. He's a nice value play on the slate. He's been pretty good hitting the ball lately, though he's not scoring a ton of fantasy points the last few games. He definitely has the upside that he can get a multi-hit game in this one, and he's definitely an interesting situation. He also has good RBI potential on the slate as well, and he tends to be good at drawing some walks, so that gives him a little bit of upside to get on base at least. Though he doesn't have that much of stolen base upside, though. A couple other guys we would look at would be like Spencer Steer, Vinny Pasquantino, and Miguel Sano. I will talk about Sano for a second here. He can play at first or third base. He has looked really good yesterday, and he ended up hitting a home run. He looks pretty solid today again. The home run metric is also pretty good for this slate, and he's a nice value play in general. So that's probably my favorite super value play. But Nate Lowe also has some utility on the slate. And then a one-off for Miami would be Jake Berger at this position. So I didn't. Sorry, not Miami. I don't. Miami's not even on the slate. I don't know why I mentioned that. Anyhow, let's. Sorry about that. Let's look at second base here. So second base has some expensive options at the top as well, and that's going to be Ozzy Albies, Keto Marte. Both these guys have a lot of potential today. Ozzy has been inconsistent this season with injuries and things like that, but a week ago he started hitting the ball very well, and then last week he's been pretty. In the last 5 days, he's really struggled. However, he's got really good metrics today. He doesn't have the bit. He's not typically a huge home run hitter, but he does have decent metrics on this one. But really today, just getting a couple hits is definitely in play on this one, and he has a lot of upside as a result. But Keto Marte, I don't know why he's still priced here at $5,100. I keep thinking he's going to pop up, which he has a couple times. But he's come back down a little bit today, and his home run metrics today are solid. Even though that's not his biggest strength here, he has really good hitting metrics for today, and he has really good upside. I mean, he's got more upside for scoring runs and getting RBIs than a lot of players at this position, so he's definitely worth a look. A couple other guys I would consider today would be Jonathan India for Cincinnati, as he draws really good metrics on the slate. He doesn't have huge home run upside, but he's just got good hitting potential, and so he'll also get more. He should get plenty of at bats on this one, so that gives him some potential. And he also has a little bit of stolen base upside, which definitely helps on this particular slate. He's one of the better value plays at this position. A couple other guys I would consider be Gleyber Torres, who should be back in the starting lineup today for the Yankees. Assuming he is, and he'll be somebody I would consider, as he's got fantastic metrics today. I really like his upside and home run potential on this slate, which is rare sometimes at second base. But if we want to go super cheap, Colt Keith for Detroit jumps off the page as a great play. He's been pretty good lately, getting some hits and stuff, so I think he's going to have some nice upside at this dirt cheap price in a favorable matchup. I also think Brendan Rodgers is a good contrarian option on the slate as well. So that would be what I like at second base here. Let's look at third base. So third base is a kind of a difficult position today because it's pretty expensive, but nobody looks all that great. Rafael Devers is the top overall play, though. But he's not a must play by any stretch because his metrics are not as good as they typically are. But he still has good home run upside on the slate. But I actually like Austin Riley, quite a bit better today for Atlanta. Now he has struggled this season, but he has been getting some hits the last few games. And if he can string a home run, he can definitely pay off here. I wish he was a little bit less, a little bit priced down a little bit more, but he does have good potential on the slate. I would also look at Mikael Garcia and Alex Bregman as decent plays, but I also like Daniel Schieneman from Cleveland. Cleveland's got some upside on the slate, and I think that he's going to have some potential today as a dirt cheap option at this position. He's got some really good metrics, at least from just hitting perspective on the slate, but he definitely, he's not really a home run hitter very much, but he definitely has some potential on this one. Miguel Sano, Matt Berling also in play today at this position. So let's look at our next shortstop position here now. This is a very terrible position today, except for one particular guy, and that would be David Hamilton for Boston. He's my favorite play at this position. He's got the best, I mean, outside of the expensive dudes like Gunnar Henderson, Bobby Witt, and Ella De La Cruz, he's got some of the better hitting metrics on this entire slate for this position. So he's definitely one of my favorite plays. He's also he's also a very nice value play at $4,200. And Boston definitely looks like a pretty decent team to be stacked up against today. And so I do think that he's a great choice and a core play for me here. I mean, Bobby Witt Jr., Ella De La Cruz, Corey Seager, and Gunnar Henderson all have some utility, but they're definitely super high risk on the slate, being super expensive, and especially when you can pay down for a guy like David Hamilton, how he's playing right now. He gives you a lot of room to do things. If you want to go away from him, though, you could look at Gabriel Arias or Zach Neto as kind of contrarian options, and Orlando Arcia would be like a Hail Mary play at this position. Uh, O'Neill Cruz and Volpe for the Yankees also have some utility on the slate, though. Looking at the outfielders, we have a pretty extensive outfield today, but uh, it's going to be a pretty rough one from a fantasy perspective because the value here is all over the place. Uh, some of the more expensive guys don't look very good, like Aaron Judge and Otani, because they have tougher matchups. Ozuna looks okay, but he's just overpriced right now. Same with Alvarez and Jaron Duran. But Stephen Kwan, he looks absolutely phenomenal for Cleveland today. He's got really good metrics here. He's not a huge home run hitter, obviously, but he has good just hitting metrics today. I think it's almost like a multi-hit game is definitely in play here. And of course, he does have some stolen base upside as well. He should be able to manage to get RBI or two with those hits as well, which definitely helps his upside. Uh, but looking at some other guys like Corbin Carroll, he definitely looks like an interesting option on the slate. Oopsie. For Arizona. He has been inconsistent this season, but he's kind of a contrarian option today. Just like if you don't want to use Quan or Jaron Duran or something, then Corbin Carroll would definitely have some utility here. But he definitely doesn't have a lot of home run upside either, which is a little bit strange to have some really good options at this position that don't have a whole lot of home run upside. Another guy I really like a lot today, and he's very close to being a core play, is Willie Abreu for Boston. He's been pretty good this season, though he's been inconsistent. The last two games, he's really struggled, but I think he's got a very favorable matchup here, and Boston's going to be a popular team to stack up, and I think he'll be somebody you have to consider in this one, though he has been battling a few injuries, so do keep that in mind. That's why I didn't keep him as a core play. But looking at some other options here, Jackson Merrill looks very interesting for San Diego here. He's been pretty solid lately, and he has nice home run metrics today, which for him is decent. But he doesn't have the best metrics, but he's still decent there, so he's definitely worth a look. I do like Spencer Steer and Tyler O'Neill at this position as well. A couple other guys to consider would be Brian Reynolds, Jerickson Profar, Taylor Ward, and Lourdes Gurriel Jr. Some value plays here: Jared Kalenic, Randall Grichuk, Ian Happ, Adam Duvall, Andrew Benintendi, and Masataka Yoshida. I will look at Yoshida here just to showcase, like, he's $3,100 right now, and he's been hitting the ball inconsistent, but he is getting fantasy points most days. If he can get a couple good hits here, which he's definitely capable of, then he was definitely somebody I would consider on the slate. If we look at this whole slate and we want to look at just home run potential, we do have some guys that I think have a lot of home run upside today. Aaron Judge obviously jumps off the page as probably the best home run upside guy on the slate. Jordan Alvarez, Royce O'Neal both also have good upside. But Miguel Sano for the Angels, he's a very sneaky play today, and he's nice and cheap. Matt Olson is probably the safest home run hitter on the slate based on matchups and everything else. But Juan Soto, Marcelo Ozuna, Rafael Devers all have a lot of potential for that. So that's kind of who I would look at if you're looking at home run guys for your lineups today. Sano definitely hits that number pretty good. If we're going to look at some guys that are dirt cheap that are going to be good values, Andrew Benintendi and Colt Keith definitely jump off the page as the best two sub $3,000 plays on the slate. But I also like Daniel Schieneman there for Cleveland, as he has got multi-position potential and he's dirt cheap. Ramon Laureano also looks interesting. If he draws a start for Atlanta in the outfield, he can get some nice, cheap value there. Randall Grichuk and Masataka Yoshida, also at $3,100 a piece, have a lot of potential. I was going to look at Grichuk too, because he's a guy that Really does have some potential today, even though he has struggled throughout the season. From a fantasy point perspective, he does get some hits occasionally, and he's cheap enough that if you can get a couple hits, then he can pay off for you on this one. So, with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.